Hi, I'm Mitch, and welcome to the Restoration Road, where my guest today is Isaac Norris, worship leader at Pathway Community Church. Although Isaac is young, he is anointed by the Holy Spirit to lead worship. You're going to love hearing his journey and be moved by some of the pain along the way. But God is seeking you and me to worship him 24/7 in all we do. And music is a tool to get us there. Isaac, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
You grew up in a Christian home, but when you were 7 years old, your parents became missionaries to Russia.
That's true.
What was that like as a 7-year-old leaving the United States and go to live in Russia?
I remember like when we were on the tarmac leaving Fort Wayne crying. Like I was very upset.
I believe
And
it.
then by the time we got to Russia, I was super excited to be there.
Oh, you were? And then what was it like? Did you have to learn the language?
Yeah, had to learn the language. We had for a little while, we had a Russian teacher that would kind of give us some Russian language teachings, lessons. But for the most part, we picked it up on the street with kids, with our friends.
Awesome. And your mom and dad planted 7 churches?
7 churches in 7 years. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was it like reintegrating yourself back in the United States?
We had the benefit of, over the course of 7 years, I think we visited the States 3 times, typically for a couple months at a time. And so when we were home and it was a school year, my parents would put us back in school. So I would have these friend groups that were developing. I think I was here in kindergarten, here in 3rd grade, here in 6th grade for a while. And so I had friend groups that were forming, but then when I came back and it was middle school, all of a sudden those friend groups had started to separate because clickiness and all that. And I played in a band, so I wanted to play in the band. I wanted to sing in choir, and I wanted to play sports.
Mm-hmm.
And I found in middle school that was not the most popular thing to try to do all of those. So it took a little while, but I was homeschooled, so I was hungry for community. I was hungry for friend groups and organized sports and all that. So
did they eventually bring you in those individual groups? Were you welcomed in?
I think once we hit, it took a couple years, but I think once we hit high school, those things kind of started to break up, and people had established their groups. They weren't necessarily judging people that would kind of cross over the groups, and so I found a great community of friends at Leo.
For people that are probably now starting to put some of it together, can you describe what your brothers are doing today and what they're sort of known for?
Yeah. So they, after high school, both of them eventually got into real estate, and they worked for my uncle's company for a while, and then they kind of decided to branch out on their own, and they started MBN Properties, where they primarily were doing flips. And
flipping houses?
Yeah, they were flipping houses.
Buying a house that needed a little work and redoing it?
Yes, they were flipping homes, and eventually they decided they were going to try to do a pilot with HGTV, and they did a show that is just a pilot episode, small town, big flip, that had the potential of getting picked up, but it didn't, which I think they were actually grateful. Like now, because the time commitment and all that kind of stuff, they were like, hey, you know what? We need to focus on our business.
Yeah, it would be like another business.
Yes, it really would. So now they're both involved in real estate. They build homes. They still flip homes. They sell homes. So they're kind of following my dad's path with that.
That's cool. And your sister-in-law is one of our favorite people ever on the show, Shelby Lynn.
Yes, she is.
You come back and you're involved in your local church. Was your local church the one that sent you to Russia?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you have one night a get-together of the students. Can you describe that night?
Yeah, so we had moved back in March, and in talking to my parents, I don't think the plan was for us to stay. Kind of just make sure our family's good, and then I think eventually head back, and I think my dad was actually taking trips back and forth. So we kind of reintegrated. We plugged in with our youth group, we plugged in with our church, and as you described, we were at a gathering one night after church, and we were going home, and kind of a big caravan of us. I think there was 4 or 5 cars.
You're all teenagers?
We're all teenagers. And we had one of the cars in front of us. One of the kids thought it would be kind of fun to stand on the car surf. And it was on Tonkel Road, and he kind of pulled out, and we were following, and I remember our driver saying, okay, this isn't good. We're just going to kind of slow down and see what happens.
You're in the vehicle behind it?
We're in the vehicle behind. And eventually, I don't know exactly what happened, but he ended up falling off the car, kind of fell into the middle of the road, and was knocked unconscious. We pulled up beside him, and the other cars all stopped behind. We were really close to the house that we had left. And so we all got out of the car. We were all surrounding him, trying to see what's happening. And we had sent one of the cars back to the place we were at to call for help. And my sister, Sarah, she was the only person standing on the northbound lane of Tonkel. The rest of us were in the southbound lane, kind of because he was in the middle. And an oncoming car saw us, swerved into the northbound lane to get out of the way, and hit my sister. She passed away the next day. Yeah.
What does that do inside the hearts of your family? You grew up in a Christian home. How does everybody process that? I assume it's a little bit like slow motion as you go through the funeral process.
Yeah.
But then life hits.
Yeah, I think, the hard thing is I don't know exactly, I can speak from my perspective, I don't know exactly how my family took it, but I know that all of us handled it very differently. I've kind of always been the glass half full person. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I think which I feel like I found out later in life, I buried it. I was able to say, hey, let's look at the brighter side. She's in heaven with Jesus, and that's great. Obviously, there's grief, but I think for my family, it just took all of us, and I still to this day, it's been 18 years, still to this day, that's still there's pain of losing someone. So I think, each of us grieved differently. We clung to the truth that we know that we have in Jesus, and I think that's what eventually got us all through. It just took us all different seasons.
And how old were you then?
I was 13.
So you go through high school, you're doing your music and sports, and you decide to go to college, and where do you end up?
I only applied to one school, and it was Indiana University. I loved Hoosier basketball. I didn't love Hoosier football. I was more a Notre Dame guy. Probably something to do with the winning record there.
I think so.
But yeah, I ended up at IU. Wasn't sure what I wanted to pursue. My brother Nate had started pursuing film production. He actually had moved to LA to go to film school.
Oh, wow.
And so I said, I like film production, so I want to get into film production. So I kind of pursued that. That's what I ended up graduating from college with. And yeah, that's I love Indiana.
Now, as you were going through college, you started to wrestle with whether your parents' faith was your own.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of those challenges and how you processed it?
Yeah, I think, getting out of I'm still in the Bible Belt, but getting out of that kind of sheltered life that, especially through my teenage years, that I experienced, I think when I got to IU, I found that the faith that my parents had wasn't the faith that I had, because the faith that I had was based on rules. And it was based on, hey, let's see what we can get away with and make sure that we're not sinning and make sure that we still keep in, the good graces of God. And so for me, I found in college just that focus on just always trying to be the rule keeper and to always be that person. I made a decision because there was no foundation for me. It was just all rules. And so for me, I made a decision kind of going out of my sophomore year into my junior year that, I just want to let go of the rules. And I want to have fun. I don't want to be worried about the rules. And so I kind of, for that year, embraced a partying lifestyle. I remember I was skipping classes. It just was not a healthy time. And the cool thing is God knew the entire time, and God was using that season of my life to build a better foundation. And I found myself probably February or March of my junior year depressed and not sleeping. I just couldn't sleep. I wasn't going to classes. And I couldn't figure out what was going on inside me. I think I knew, but I couldn't figure out what it was. There was an emptiness to living the life that I had without rules. There's just nothing was fulfilling. And so I found myself, not making like a direct, hey, I'm going to change my life and from here on out I'm great. But I found myself probably at like 5 a.m. one morning, not able to sleep, and I just kind of acknowledged God's presence and kind of said, I understand. I understand what's happening here, and I understand what's wrong. I have the background of knowledge of the Bible and the background of knowledge of Christianity. So let's use that to build a foundation that's centered around Jesus and what the grace and mercy that he extends to me each day.
So that moment, you shifted in your mindset at that time from rules to relationship?
Yeah, that was a big shift for me.
Wow.
To understand that personal relationship that isn't based on rules, but it's based on really what's inside my heart.
Talk about your love story with Sarah. How did you meet?
Yeah, so my wife and I, we both grew up in smaller Nazarene churches, and there was a week-long youth conference that was going to happen in Houston, and our churches decided, hey, let's rent a bus and let's go together, kind of caravan, and my group of guy friends, her group of girlfriends, we all just kind of hung out all week. And this was in 2002.
Because she's from the area?
She's from Columbia City,
Okay.
yeah. And so we kind of hung out all week, but this was before Facebook, this was before social media, so that week kind of ended, and I think it was probably before I even had a cell phone. And that week kind of ended, and we kind of dispersed, like, hey, that was fun. We all hung out. And over the course of the years, we'd run into each other at the mall, or we'd run into each other, at a movie or something like that, and we'd say, hey, we should all hang out again. That was fun. Like that summer of 2008, Facebook was a thing, and we kind of had reconnected at, or she came down with her friends to an event at IU. We ran into each other. I learned that she had broken up with her boyfriend, and I had always been like friend zoned with her, like, hey, this is not gonna happen. She's unreachable. And I learned that she was broken up with her boyfriend, so I said, hey, there's a mutual friend that's having a wedding. Will you go with me? And she said no. And she went with my best friend. So
Oh, that's like a double.
I know, it was. So I invited her
Punch in the
best
gut.
friend. And then kind of after that, she eventually agreed to a date with me, and then the rest is history.
Rest is history.
The rest is history.
So you get married, and what do you guys do for a career?
So we got married in 2010, and a few months after we were married, we moved to Sarasota, Florida. I worked at Brookstone. Sarah worked at Starbucks.
So you could sell all those cool gadgets?
Yes, I was the youngest person working at Brookstone. So my job was to always keep a helicopter in the air, a remote control helicopter.
Oh, you had fun all day
I know,
long.
so I did. I got to have fun. And I remember her dad visited us, and we always tell the story. He said, I think you guys are kind of floundering down here. And he was 100% right, because we weren't sure. We wanted to do what we wanted to do. And eventually, through one of my dad's connections, we moved from Florida to Kansas City, and we agreed to work with the Jesus Film. We were volunteer missionaries for a year with the Jesus Film, and kind of got to use, my wife went to school for journalism, I went to school for film production, so naturally we were a great team to say, so we did some reporting for them. We went to Central America, and we went to Africa and did some reporting for them that it was really neat. And it was kind of our first taste for us in getting involved in ministry, and it was something that we'd always had interest in.
I would have to think that had a huge impact on your life.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. To not only experience different cultures, which is always, I think, beneficial for everyone, but to have this. I remember we met with a pastor in Guatemala, and I remember he was wearing shoes that were nicer than all of us here, and it was his only pair of shoes. And he said, I walk 12 hours away to a new village that we showed the Jesus Film in, and I'm the pastor of that village. So I walk 12 hours there, I'll end up staying the night there, and then I'll walk 12 hours back. And he said, and I do that every week.
Oh my God.
And I remember being like, that's what we should be about.
Yeah.
That commitment. And he didn't complain about it. He was an older guy too. Didn't complain about it. And I remember, still to this day, my wife and I were very impacted by just his faith on display.
Mm.
Yeah.
So what do you transition to next?
So we finished our year-long kind of volunteer contract with the Jesus Film, and through the course of a couple decisions, we decided, hey, we're going to come back home. We like the idea of starting a family. We also don't like raising support. I don't like asking for money. So I was like, hey, let's come home and save our own money, and then be home for a couple years, and then let's go out and do this again. Mm-hmm. And so I got back. I took the first job that was offered to me, and I was selling granite countertops for a local company. And Sarah started working at Granite Ridge with my dad. And we started doing that. I eventually got my real estate license, kind of saw, hey, maybe I'm just going to pursue my brother's path. I did a couple flips. And then I remember we were attending Pathway Community Church at the time, and I saw an advertisement in their bulletin they were looking for a video person to bring on full time. And I was like, I can do that. And I miss video, and I like video.
Mm-hmm.
And so I applied. I was probably a couple months from quitting my job to do real estate full time. And I applied and got the job and kind of put everything into that.
That's really cool. It feels a lot like God to me at work in your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's the role and how does that unfold, your new role?
So my new role was I was kind of their creative media director, and I would help with everything from kind of sermon illustrations to stories to highlight videos of baptisms.
Oh, cool.
So kind of
a guy like you makes a church, man. I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I loved it. The great thing that I had with my supervisor is this was like the first role in video that we've had, and he gave me so much leeway to just kind of say, hey, like what you think works, and work with Ron and make sure things are great, and I loved it.
That's awesome. So have you ever led worship at Pathway during this time period?
No, so I remember, kind of. I remember I joined the staff, and I had already talked with the worship pastor at that point, and I had formed a band here in Fort Wayne that we were playing at a couple different churches, including County Line. And I remember saying, hey, like I have a band, here's a video, I would love to help with worship where you need it. And I remember having lunch with him and—
With Ron?
No, with Gordon, with the worship pastor. And I remember I probably said the line, where you need it, and he probably was like, that's great. Because he asked me to help with their 5th and 6th grade ministry, leading worship for it, which 5th and 6th graders are not at all the easiest kids to lead worship for. But it was an opportunity to serve, and it was an opportunity to use my gift. And I remember it was not fun. It was not my favorite, but I liked the ability to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think over the course of a year and a half in my kind of creative media role, I think I helped with their weekend worship experience. I did some middle school. I don't know if I did high school, but I did kind of 5th and 6th grade. But I also, that itch was being scratched because I had a band that we'd practice and we'd play a few places.
So what led to your first time of leading worship at the church service?
Yeah. Oh, you mean like as a volunteer?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't remember. I just remember I was on staff and I was friends with like a lot of people in the worship department. And so I was like, hey, I would love to like help with the weekend services if you guys ever need it. And I probably was persistent and maybe a little bit annoying with that. But eventually I think they kind of like, yeah, you should come and lead.
And then one day the position of worship leader at Pathway Community Church opens up.
Yep.
And what are your steps?
So a little bit before that, a couple months before that, I had a friend from Kansas City reach out, and he said, hey, my brother in North Carolina, their church has been looking for a worship leader. I've seen some of your videos. Would you have some interest in applying for that? Because I think you could be a good fit. And I remember being like, no, I don't think I want to be a worship leader. And then I said, I'll take a week. I thought about it, and I kind of told him, hey, we're not interested in pursuing that. And it was just, God's timing is amazing. Because then a couple months later, our Ron pulled me in his office. He said, hey, Gordon, our worship pastor, is stepping into marriage and parenting ministry. And so we're going to have a vacancy in the worship leader position, and we would love for you to fill in the interim while we do a national search to find his replacement. And I don't know what I was thinking, but in those course of those couple months, I decided, hey, I do want to be a worship pastor. And I told him, I said, hey, I'll do the interim, but will you consider me for the job? And he said, sure. In my mind, I was thinking, I'm not going to get this job, but it would be great for my resume. It would be great for my resume. If I want to be a worship leader leading at a church this size for an extended period of time, because it was probably going to be 3 to 6 months. So I stepped in. I was still doing the video stuff, but I started leading every weekend. The team was very gracious and kind to accept me and all my flaws, and they still are.
And they had their search, and they landed on you.
They did. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. It probably, I think I did it for 4 months before I think Ron, maybe it was the executive pastor at the time, said, hey, we're really considering you. And, you know, I have to mention, my predecessor, Gordon, was so instrumental in that. He was so kind. He was training me. He was training me. I was getting worship leading lessons from him. And he also was in my corner with all the leadership saying, I think Isaac is the guy.
Okay, so I walk into a citywide prayer time that we're doing in Fort Wayne, and you lead worship, and you did Build My Life by House Fires, and something happened in the invisible that was hard for me to describe. So I pursued you and said, dude, tell me about your life. And you told me that something happened because I started talking about you to like everybody I encountered that week. Do you know Isaac Norris? Hey, you go to Pathway. And they would say he was always good, something has happened in the last, however they would say it, year or two, season of time, that has just taken us to a whole nother level. So I asked you what that was, and you had an encounter with God.
Yeah, I think God just has an interesting way of working things out, and he has interesting timing. And I think what happened for me is that it took me about 1.5 to 2 years to understand even what I was doing. Every single week, I'm not gonna say it was a struggle, but every single week I was learning so much that I couldn't focus on anything else. I was just trying to make the service happen and get myself there, ready, prepared, because having Sunday come every single week is a lot. And so I think God was so gracious to kind of say, you do your thing. And I would remember I would go home and I'd be like, I would talk to my wife and I would say, hey, like, I don't have a lot of vision for this job. I know what I'm supposed to be doing, but I've always thought like God will give us some more vision so I know kind of what direction our team should be heading. And I wasn't able to speak a lot of vision to our team. And it took me about 1.5 to 2 years that I felt like what ended up happening is God really showed me the people that I was around. He really showed me the team that I was working with. And what really changed, and I can't attribute any of what happened to me or to extra practice so it's better on the weekend, but what I would say is God has changed my heart to say, hey, the music is second, and the people that you're serving with are first. And that's your focus. The people, discipleship is your focus. It's not making excellent music. I firmly believe we serve the most creative being in the universe and the most excellent being in the universe. So setting the bar high for our team and for the level of excellence we want to achieve through music is very important.
Amen.
But he taught me so much about saying, forget that for a second and let's look at the people. And then I fumbled my way through that as well. I had like 40 team members and I was like, I'll disciple them all. And then I remember meeting with a guy and he was like, you're trying to be better than Jesus.
Yeah,
because Jesus had 12.
Yeah.
And so I finally, with that wisdom, I was like, okay, let's step back here and let's reassess and do this a different way. But that's really the change.
That's awesome. A vision for worship.
Yeah.
Isaac Norris, you are anointed by God as a worship leader, and I just can't have you here without you doing one song. Would you do that for us?
I'd be happy to do that.
You got your guitar?
Thank you. In the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, give me Jesus. And when I am alone, oh, and when I am alone, oh, and when I am alone, give me Jesus, give me Jesus, give me Jesus. You can have all this world, give me Jesus. Oh, and to die. Oh, and when I come to die, oh, and when I come to die, give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. You can have all this world. Give me Jesus. You can have all this world. Give me Jesus.
Amen. Thank
Amen.
you, Isaac. You know, Jesus in John 4:24 said, God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship him in spirit and truth. What Jesus was probably referencing that was so prevalent in that day is the Samaritans would worship on Mount Gerizim, and it was filled with emotion. And the Jews would worship in their synagogues, and they would worship in truth. It was all about truth. And you know, it's the same way for us 2,000 years later. We have a tendency to go one way or the other when it comes to worship. But Jesus wants us to worship, to bend the knees of our heart and lift up him in spirit and truth. I would call it a wholehearted worship that I choose to with my will, that I believe to and I fill my mind with his scriptures, that my spirit connects with him and I sense his presence, and that with my emotions I want to. There's a wholehearted act in bending the knees of my heart in worship to the God of the universe. And music is a catalyst to worshiping God in spirit and truth with our lives 24/7.